Tonight on Bridge City News, a controversial new pro-life movie is coming to Lethbridge tomorrow. We chatted with the producers of the movie Unplanned. A $100 million workplace harassment case has been settled involving the RCMP. And NASA says it plans to go back to the moon permanently. We have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The controversial pro-life movie Unplanned is set to hit select theatres in Canada tomorrow, including here in Lethbridge at the Movie Mill. I had a chance to chat with the producers of the film, Chuck Conselman and Carrie Solomon, about the backlash they've received and why they decided to make this film.
We didn't make this movie as a political statement. We made this movie for the hundreds of millions of women and men that are suffering from angst from having an abortion. This is about hope and love and forgiveness and, of course, redemption. And so what we ask people to do is just basically make your decision after you've seen the movie.
Watch the powerful interview with Chuck and Carrie, producers of the controversial film Unplanned, coming up after business news. Details have been released regarding a class action lawsuit against the RCMP. The workplace harassment case will pay out $100 million to the women with eligible claims. According to the press release from Higgardy Law in Calgary, a large portion of the claims were from women who were harassed or discriminated against in Alberta. The claims go back to the mid-1970s. The compensation will range from $10,000 to $220,000 per person. Lawyers for Cheryl Tiller, Mary Ellen Copland, and Dana Roach say the settlement opens the door to potential claims for thousands of women who worked in non-police roles. Higgardy Law in Calgary says this is not just a Calgary issue.
It's not Calgary-centric. This is not Calgary-centric. This is about the fact that we believe that there are a lot of claimants who developed their claims while they were working in Alberta, and many of them we expect are still living in Alberta. You know, not only are there 45 detachments that are in Alberta that are subject to the municipal police service agreements. But there are 118 detachments, RCMP detachments in Alberta, 118. So those are a lot of workplace locations where this type of behavior may have occurred. The estimate that's been used in the discussions is that there might be 1,500 claimants in total. But actually, we have a good experience with this. From the Merlo-Davidson claim, which was a very similar claim, a very similar settlement for female RCMP members. And the number of class members in that group were 31,000.
According to Staff Sergeant Glenn Henry of the Coaldale Detachment, so far there have been no reported settlements here in southwestern Alberta. A major drug bust in Edmonton resulted in the arrest of 6 people and the seizure of over $1 million worth of cash and drugs. Alert's Project Embrace was a 9-month investigation that targeted the group's operation, including supply, distribution, and street-level sales. Some of the drugs confiscated included cocaine and meth. More than $340,000 in cash was also seized. Police agencies across Alberta and BC were involved in the investigation. Police remind us if we see any drug or gang-related activity in our neighborhoods to call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. Police in Taber responded to a call from a Lethbridge cab driver who had reportedly been left without payment and felt threatened by a customer on Sunday. According to the driver, the man had a knife and was using it in a threatening manner. 35-year-old Sean Eric Hart was arrested and charged with possessing a weapon, uttering threats, mischief, and failing to comply with a probation order. Hart remains in custody and will appear in provincial court on July 16th. Lethbridge police need our help finding a missing woman. 36-year-old Priscilla Marie Oldshoes was last heard from on June 25th. She has ties to Lethbridge, Cardston, and Kyanine. She's Aboriginal, about 5 foot 8 inches tall, 150 pounds, with straight black hair and brown eyes. She also has several tattoos, including LA on her left arm and the word monk on her left forearm. If you've seen Oldshoes or know where she is, call Lethbridge Police right away at 403-328-4444. Police say 2 missing children who were the subject of an Amber Alert earlier today have been found and are safe. York Regional Police tweeted that 2 brothers aged 2 and 4 were found with their grandfather earlier this morning driving in Toronto. Police issued the alert for the boys who had been last seen on Wednesday with their grandfather at a mall north of Toronto. Police say the kids and their grandfather were located as a direct result of the Amber Alert. Introduced to hard drugs at the age of 8, one Lethbridge man opens up about his road to recovery after what seemed like a hopeless past. 49-year-old Alan Williger spoke with BCN's Loris Alexander on how he traded in his abuse-filled past to become a new creation.
Alan Williger is no stranger to substance abuse. In fact, he grew up with it. By the age of 14, he had already overdosed 4 times.
My parents, they were both alcoholics. My dad was an alcoholic and very violent. My mom was an alcoholic and did lots of pills.
Part of it was a coping mechanism as Williger grew up with a violent father and was sexually abused.
I couldn't deal with it, right? You know, it was hard to deal with, and I got farther and farther into the drug scene.
He says it's all he ever knew. Normalcy was getting high to the point of blacking out. Then, tragedy struck.
I was in the process of cleaning my gun one night, and I blacked out. I woke up the next morning in the drunk tank to see if I was going to get out, and they said no, because while I was cleaning my gun and blacked out, my fiance at the time, who was 7 months pregnant, when I blacked out, I shot my fiance and I shot our unborn baby.
Williger served time for 10 years. After getting out, he got a wake-up call. He lost his 23-year-old niece on fentanyl, and 2 days later, his sister overdosed on the same. After reaching out for help, was finally introduced to Streets Alive.
I just got to a point where I couldn't take it no more, so I got down on my knees one night and I asked God to come into my life and help me run my life. And since then, I've been doing great. I love it.
Williger says he will be eternally grateful for how much Streets Alive has done for him.
Streets have been a big part of my life, and they will always be a big part of my life because they've helped me get to where I am today, right? I'm the person I am today because of Streets Alive.
Currently working part-time at Streets Alive, Williger is hoping he can help other people get off the streets. When asked about future plans, he says he'd like to become a missionary one day. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Big Brothers and Big Sisters organizations across the country rely on over 14,000 community volunteers to provide mentorship and guidance to kids. Here's a way you can get your teens to inspire others and to have a rewarding experience at the same time.
We have 91 kids waiting for a big brother or big sister. Those kids are in 2 different programs. One is our community-based program where an adult volunteer takes a child out in the community for 2 to 3 hours a week going bowling, or they can go to your house, you can take them fishing, really anything that's fun. Matches are based on compatibility, so it's a kid that you would have like interests with. And the other program we have is called In-School Mentoring, and it's an hour a week throughout the school year. So you go to a child's school. It's not academic based, so it's about, you could do a puzzle if the gym is available, you can go in the gym, that kind of stuff. And really, our kids are 6 to 16, and they're so amazing. These kids just need someone in their life that's just theirs and only theirs, that can offer unconditional friendship with no strings attached.
To learn more about volunteer opportunities with Big Brothers and Big Sisters in Lethbridge, make sure you check out their website. Food for All. That's the theme of a contest put on by the Interfaith Food Bank. For the 3rd year in a row, the organization has conducted a school art competition with Lethbridge High School students. It allows students a chance to express what they thought their world would look like if there was enough food available for everyone.
We were looking to inspire youth to think about, what does it mean to have enough food or to not have enough food, and to get them inspired in thinking about, how they can give or how they can contribute to hunger issues in their community. For the food bank, it's really helpful for us to have some visual things that we can use to help promote our cause as well. And so we're hoping to use some of the artwork and some of our promotional materials, and again, to inspire other youth to get involved with our cause.
Having enough food is a really big issue in the society, so when the opportunity came up, I thought it was a really good idea.
It was really interesting to see the artwork come in this year, and we had 3 lucky students that were able to walk away with some pretty substantial cash prizes for their artwork, which is really nice.
The 2 first-place winners each received $100 cash, while the overall winner took home a $300 cash prize. A note from the City of Lethbridge that this is Street Wheelers Weekend. You'll be seeing a lot of classic cars rumbling through Lethbridge and on display. From 6:30 till midnight tomorrow night, 3rd Avenue South will be closed between 4th Street and Mayor McGrath Drive South for the cruise. If you're in the area, you'll be encouraged to use Mayor McGrath and Scenic Drive as alternate routes. There'll also be no parking allowed on this section of 3rd Avenue South and some areas around Galt Gardens from 5 until midnight. Lethbridge is hosting the Provincial Little League Championship Tournament this weekend. Baseball teams from across our city, Calgary, Edmonton, and Medicine Hat will be participating. A series of round-robin games will determine the 2 finalists. The Lethbridge Bisons have been training hard for this event for several weeks.
But the 6 weeks is a bit of a grind, to be honest. We go anywhere from 5 to 6 days a week typically. And yeah, the kids have been great. They've bought into what we've been preaching. And yeah, this is kind of the, what we're working towards right here.
It's so fun. Most kids have trouble finding stuff to do this summer. They always sit in the basement, but we got to come out here, play baseball, represent Lethbridge. Our main goal is to make it to Canadians, yes, and Langley, BC, but one of our goals is just come out here and compete, represent Lethbridge as best as we can, have good sportsmanship, teamwork, and just get better.
The tournament will end on July the 14th. We have a new addition to Bridge City News. It's video journalist Jeanette Rocher, who's going to be hosting a new midday show on BCN coming up later this fall. Jeanette, welcome to the team.
Thank you so much, Hal. It's great to be here.
So tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, a lot of people don't realize that I was born in Puerto Rico, only lived there till I was 3, but just recently I had the chance to go back and help out with the Hurricane Maria relief project. So it was fantastic to go back after the first time since I was 3 years old. Other than that, lived all over the States, all over Canada, including Micronesia, a little tiny island near Guam called Saipan, and that's where I began my broadcast career.
That's amazing.
So,
that's
yeah.
Incredible. Much better winters over there as well, I bet, right?
Oh, fantastic. Oh yeah, those 80-degree days, you cannot beat those.
So tell us about the show, which is launching later this fall in September, and how it may be different from the Supper Hour newscast.
Well, the show is going to be called BCN Today. We're launching on September 24th, and it's going to appeal a little bit more to the daytime viewers. So it'll be somewhat the same as the 5 p.m., only just appealing more to the daytime audience.
One or two. So, I mean, it's wonderful as well for some of the stay-at-home moms, some of the seniors, the shut-ins, maybe people working shift work.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we're looking forward to that.
That's great. Welcome again to the team.
Thank you so much.
The province of Saskatchewan has agreed to host up to 2,000 people displaced by the wildfires in northern Ontario. The Ontario government says more than 20 communities in the province have been impacted by the fires. The chief of an Indigenous community said evacuation by land and water was put on hold because of a lack of places to send people. Premier Doug Ford asked Premier Scott Moe for help, and he agreed. The evacuees are being helped in Regina, Saskatoon, and Prince Albert. Canada's premiers met today in Saskatoon for the final day of their annual gathering, and Quebec was the center of talks. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney said he will keep trying to work with Quebec Premier François Legault on moving oil through the province by pipeline as part of a future energy corridor.
I spent several hours with Premier Legault in Quebec City last month, and we had a very frank and honest exchange. I said to him plainly that Quebec receives about $13 billion a year in equalization payments. Almost all of that comes from Alberta. And we expect provinces that benefit from our energy wealth to help us actually develop that wealth. If you're going to benefit from the resources that pay the bills in the Federation, then help us develop those resources and get a fair price for them. At the Western Premiers Conference I hosted in Edmonton 2 weeks ago, I was very pleased that Premier Horgan of British Columbia agreed to strong language about economic corridors, including for the ability to build pipelines and move energy. So I think there's a growing consensus across the country, and I know Premier Legault would like a greater capacity to export his hydroelectricity, and he's interested in bringing gas pipelines into Quebec.
Legault has previously said it is not socially acceptable in Quebec for pipelines. Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister, meanwhile, says he plans to express his concerns with Quebec's new law that bans public servants in positions of power from wearing religious symbols.
I think that this bill is a danger to the freedoms that we value. Perhaps for many Canadians, they say, well, it doesn't affect me directly, so I'm not caring that much. I don't think that's a good attitude to take. I think that when our freedoms of any of our neighbors, of any of our friends in the Canadian family, when those freedoms are placed at risk, then we should all join together, stand up and say, no, that's not right.
South of the border, a potential tropical storm is brewing in the Gulf of Mexico and is presenting troubles for Louisiana. First, the possibility that the Mississippi River will approach the tops of the levees and a danger of flash floods.
Now is absolutely the time to pay attention. Heed every single warning that comes from the city of New Orleans, and as you listen to media outlets, pay attention to all tornado as well as flash flood warnings. Be prepared for the impacts. We are monitoring levels of the Mississippi River. We are monitoring the potential threat of a tropical cyclone 2. It is still too soon to tell what the impact will be, but we believe there will be an impact.
Close to 50 years after Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon, part of the storied Apollo program, NASA officials announced that they're going back to the moon permanently. We have more now in this report.
At the very launch complex where NASA sent astronauts to the moon, new construction.
The first launch off of this pad was a Saturn V.
Kenneth Poimbuff worked on the famous Apollo missions.
Roger, we got you. We're going at
This retired space program engineer is nostalgic. He's watching as workers outfit this launch pad for a new generation of rockets and missions.
This place is history in the making, and it's not over yet.
Ignition.
And in this new program we call Artemis, named after Apollo's twin sister, we will in fact send the next man and the first woman to the South Pole of the moon.
There, NASA says its Artemis missions will harvest newly discovered water, fuel for missions to Mars.
This time when we go to the moon, it will be sustainable. In other words, we're going to go to the moon to stay.
And so everybody would normally be facing that way. T0, the rocket lifts off, and they swing this way to get a view of it.
Throughout the Kennedy Space Center, there's anticipation. Robert Seek looks back in time. He's in the firing room. The first Apollo countdowns happened here, but he's really looking ahead.
Oh, I said, well, okay, we proved we can go to the moon now. Yeah, let's find out more about those other planets out there.
From the Vehicle Assembly Building, where most moon-bound spacecraft have taken shape.
We will continue that legacy and that process as we stack our SLS rocket here, hopefully next year.
To the crawlers that carried a generation of spacecraft to the launch pads.
Houston, you're a go for landing, over.
50 years after Neil Armstrong dropped down the ladder.
I'm going to step off the limb now.
And uttered those famous words.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
NASA is leaning on the past to take us to the future.
Full express test.
From the Artemis mission to the Space Launch System and Orion spacecraft, and an eventual mission to Mars.
We did it. We humans have left the surface of this dinky little planet and gone elsewhere.
The Apollo 11 astronaut joining a nation, closely watching as NASA ushers a new chapter of spaceflight. Josh Replogle, The Associated Press.
Now here is reason number 57 why a dog is man's best friend. A backyard camera in New Jersey recorded a black bear knocking over a bird feeder and eating the bird food, only to be chased away by a fast-moving and protective dog. You don't want to mess with that pooch. It should be a nice night to take your dog for a walk. I'll have a complete look at the weather picture coming up in just a moment. We had sun mixed with cloud today, nice and warm once again. Tonight, just a few clouds with a low near 14. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with a high near 29. A nice weekend is shaping up. Sunshine and 31 on Saturday, mainly clear and 28 degrees on Sunday. Monday, just 1 degree cooler at 27. Tuesday, sunny again with a daytime high near 26 expected. And Wednesday, expect a high near 28. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 25 and an average low of 10. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 2002 at 35 degrees, and the record low was 3 in 1997. Sunrise was at 5:36, sunset at 9:38. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Victoria will have a mixture of sun and cloud and should get up to 22. Overcast and 21 for Vancouver. A good chance of rain in the Stampede City tomorrow with a high near 26. Mainly sunny and 25 degrees for Edmonton. A slight chance of showers and 26 for both Regina and Saskatoon on Friday. Just a few clouds at 26 for Winnipeg tomorrow. Toronto had a severe thunderstorm watch today. Tomorrow mainly sunny and a high near 28. Ottawa had a heat warning today. A chance of showers tomorrow and a high as well near 28 degrees. Expect a thunder shower and 26 for Montreal. Periods of rain and 20 for both Fredericton and Halifax tomorrow. Rain and 22 for Charlottetown. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, clearing with a high near 14 degrees tomorrow. The Canadian dollar traded near its highest level this year following comments from a couple of central bankers. The Bank of Canada left its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 1.75%. The dollar strengthened when Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz and Senior Deputy Governor Carolyn Wilkins said they were in no rush to cut rates. The loonie climbed as high as 76.67 US in earlier trading today. The neutral tone in Canada is in contrast to what is being said in the United States, as the Fed has said rates there could be headed lower in that country. The Canadian Cattlemen's Association said it met with federal agriculture and trade ministers about the suspension of Canadian meat export certificates to China. Ottawa says it is continuing to investigate the fraudulent activity involving Canadian pork, which led to the suspension. The Fed said they have been in contact with Chinese officials to resolve the issue. Now, it is unclear why beef products have been included in the suspension. Shipments of Canadian beef to China represents 2.6% of Canada's total beef exports last year. Ottawa says it will be moving ahead with $8.3 million in support for Canada's beef industry. The bulk of the funds will go toward Canada Beef, a marketing organization to grow beef sales internationally. Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bebeau said the move was not a reaction to China's decision to suspend all Canadian meat imports. Twitter is testing out a new feature in Canada that will allow users to hide replies to tweets. The social media platform will indicate on a tweet anytime a user decides to hide replies. It will allow users to what has been hidden as a way to dissuade brands or politicians from overusing the feature. Twitter has been blasted in the past to police their services better, particularly ahead of the fall election. The company is testing out the new option in Canada before rolling it out in other countries. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, details have been released regarding a class action lawsuit against the RCMP. The workplace harassment case will pay out $100 million to the women with eligible claims. According to the press release from Higgerty Law in Calgary, a large portion of the claims were from women who were harassed or discriminated against in Alberta. The claims go back to the mid-70s. The compensation will range from $10,000 to $220,000 per person. The controversial pro-life movie Unplanned hits theaters tomorrow in Canada, including here in Lethbridge at the Movie Mill. Up next, I chat with the producers of the film to find out why they decided to produce this movie. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come out to Galt Gardens and enjoy Shakespeare in the Park 2019 every Thursday and Friday from now until August 9th. The Lethbridge Shakespeare Performance Society presents the action-packed and exciting play Macbeth. Suitable for all ages, shows are free for an opportunity to donate. Experience the timeless magic of one of Shakespeare's best-known plays. For more information, call Kate at 403-329-4568. The Willow Creek Gospel Music Jamboree is taking place July 26th to the 28th in Granham, Alberta. Come out and enjoy live gospel music by the Liberty Quartet, Rosette, Prairie Joe, the Fort Macleod Alliance Worship Group, and more. Plus, Daryl Jans will return as MC. For more information, visit gospelmusicjamboree.com. The Gem of the West Museum in Coaldale is hosting an open house on Heritage Day, August 5th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Take in ice cream making, crafts for the kids, a scavenger hunt, and more. It's fun for the whole family, and admission is by donation. For details, visit gemofthewest.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Abortion continues to be an issue that causes clashes in our culture. Many politicians and media players say the issue is settled in Canada, and yet a majority of Canadians believe there should be some restrictions on abortion. The new movie, Unplanned, is stirring up a little bit of controversy on the topic. Joining me now is Chuck Conselman and Carrie Solomon. They're the producers, writers, directors, you name it, for this film. Gentlemen, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Now, the film has set off some sparks here in Canada. A number of theatre chains did not want to play it because of the abortion controversy. In fact, some theatre owners I've chatted with even had death threats against themselves and their staff. But after much lobbying, Unplanned finally opens in Canada. Can you share with us a bit of an overview of the film?
Sure. The film is the true life story of Abby Johnson, who is a Planned Parenthood clinic, surgical clinic director. And over the course of 8 years, she was complicit, by her own estimate, in 22,000 abortions. She worked her way up through the ranks from a volunteer escort, escorting women into the clinic, to ultimately the head of the clinic itself. And one day when she actually had to assist with an abortion, which was unusual for her, she held the ultrasound wand on an ultrasound-guided abortion and saw an abortion play out in real time in front of her. And it absolutely changed how she viewed abortion. It was her lightning strike moment, if you want to call it that. And she immediately quit that business and became a very strong pro-life advocate.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Carrie, I wanted to ask you, movie theaters often play movies that are controversial. They stir the pot a little bit. So why is this controversy any different than the rest?
I think it's fairly obvious that we're in a worldwide cultural war on just total political differences. And I think that abortion is the most polarizing of all the issues. And both sides are firmly entrenched in what they believe. But what we feel with this movie is that we didn't make this movie as a political statement. We made this movie for the hundreds of millions of women and men that are suffering from angst from having an abortion. This is about hope and love and forgiveness and, of course, redemption. And so what we ask people to do is just basically make your decision after you've seen the movie, because I think there is a lot of truth that will be imparted from seeing what the movie is all about.
What's strange from our standpoint is this film played in over 1,500 theaters here in the United States. We had no protests. We had no threats of violence. We had no closures of theaters. So this is a uniquely Canadian response to the film thus far. So it's very interesting. And the pro-choice movement in Canada seems to be very, very highly defensive with respect to this film. And so it kind of begs the question, what are they so afraid of?
So, I mean, the movie's made over 18 million in the U.S. How well do you think it'll do in Canada?
I believe that there is stiff opposition in Canada. There are movie theaters that are saying that they're going to show it, but those movie theaters are doing everything in their power for no one to be able to either find times, or they're basically, we have to do the movie before 9:30 in the morning, things like that. So it's ridiculous, really. They're saying on one hand, look, we're showing the movie just to appease people, but there is no attempt on the by the movie theaters to actually help, other than the independent movie theaters.
Which is kind of goes back to the whole pro-choice thing. They try to squelch the movie as hard as they can, try to keep theaters from playing it, and then say no one's interested.
But you know what's interesting, though? You'd think negative publicity would be good publicity because everybody's talking about it. You guys have gone viral with Unplanned. People say, well, what's the big fuss? I got to check out this movie, right?
That's absolutely correct. We had a minuscule advertising budget for Canada. And I think a large percentage of the Canadian adult population will be aware that our film is debuting this weekend. That's not an awareness that we ever could have created without this pushback.
And I think for the amount of theaters that we're going to have, which is around 50, give or take, they're going to be packed. I mean, the experience we had here in America was social media tried to squelch us, put us out of business, they wouldn't take our advertising and so on. And we get the same thing in Canada. But what happened in America was we had theaters filled over and over and over and over. So I think people are going to be really surprised because the people in Canada have called us, texted us, emailed us and said, we want the movie to come up here. This is what we desire this. So
how can people find out specifically with theaters and which cities it's playing in here in Canada?
Well, I think that they have to do a little research. They're going to have to go online, call up their local theater, say, that kind of thing, because we have unplannedtickets.com. But in Canada, by the way, most of the theaters don't put showtimes up till like 2 or 3 days before the movie comes out. So the showtime should be out now.
If they start searching their local theaters today, those showtimes should be showing up.
Right.
Well, I know here in Lethbridge, Len Binning, the owner of the movie mill, mentioned that it'll be playing at the mill. It's also playing in Calgary and Edmonton, some of the larger centers here in Alberta. Now, guys, some argue that the film is trying to judge people who have abortions. But does it really?
No, I mean, okay, look, one of the things that is really, I have to be honest, is annoying is when the media does an interview with us or they make statements and then we ask them in the middle of the interview, have you seen the movie? And they kind of hem and haw like, I'm going to at some point. Well, how can you discuss or review a movie that you haven't seen? I mean, realistically, okay, the movie, we have in America thousands, tens of thousands of pro-choicers becoming pro-life. We have women in the hundreds of thousands crying and saying, for the first time in my life, I found healing and I'm free of this weight that I've carried.
Large numbers of women who were formerly abortion workers coming out of the industry through the organization, and then there were none that Abby Johnson actually runs, which helps them transition out of the abortion industry and into other jobs.
And when you ask them, what did you think of the movie? They say, I mean, the common thing is it was all about love. It was all about hope, forgiveness. We don't even condemn. We don't take a position in here that pro-choicers are good or bad, pro-lifers are good or bad. When we first started this, what was put on our heart from the Lord was basically tell the truth. I don't want you to be biased. I don't want you to be propaganda. I don't want you to do any of that. I just want you to tell the truth. The truth will set people free. And I think when they see this, people have got to acknowledge. They got to say, this is a fair and honest view of what's going on.
Now, the movie does show an inside look of what really happens in abortion clinics. That's why it has an R rating. Now, the pro-choice side is using media channels to say the movie is untruthful and misleading. So what parts do they really have a problem with? The fact that it's so graphic, perhaps?
They don't bother mentioning. They just use a blanket dismissal, which is really crazy. If we were going to be accused of anything with respect to this movie, it's of being almost slavishly accurate to what her life was actually like. Matter of fact, if you're pro-life, there are parts of this movie that will make you distinctly uncomfortable because you're watching Abby being an incredibly motivated pro-choice woman for much of the movie until she makes her reversal. And she makes the believers around her in her life, her husband and her own family, pretty uncomfortable with her beliefs. But you get a chance to see and examine it, and you experience her life before and after, much as she did.
Also, people have got to realize that what is the pro-choice side going to say? Of course they're going to say it's inaccurate. I mean, but it's not. Look, Abby was a clinic director for 8 years.
In terms of accuracy, the doctor playing the abortionist who actually performs the procedure, which is most at issue, was Dr. Anthony Levatino, who performed over 1,200 second trimester abortions. His equipment was the real equipment. I mean, our set, we made sure we had everything accurate. We had the equipment, we had the room set up, we had the instruments. But when Doc came in, he reordered the instruments in the order he would use them during a procedure. The woman who plays the surgical abortion nurse was a formal surgical abortion nurse. What the pro-choice element is afraid of is not that it's inaccurate, but that in fact it's accurate.
Right.
Now, Abby Johnson even won an award as Employee of the Year from Planned Parenthood. What were her thoughts of the movie, and how involved was she in the script writing?
She wasn't involved in the script writing, but we did interview her and her family for about 3 or 4 days in Texas. We interviewed every single person. We interviewed every single person that was involved in the movie, the lawyers, everything. We did all our research for weeks, if not months. But anytime you do a story about somebody, anytime you do an autobiography, there's a real possibility they're going to say, this wasn't my story, or I wore a red dress on that day, or something like that. And so there was fear on our part. So we sent Abby the script. We held our breath because you want to have the person you're making a story about happy. And then we got a phone call from her, and she said, this is my life. This is my story. What you guys done is magnificent. I'm looking at my life, and it's a very weird feeling.
There was one scene in particular in the film where Abby has had a rough day at work, and she comes home and she starts spilling out some details of her work to her husband. And when it was one of the first scenes we were able to show Abby and her real life husband, afterwards he started weeping. And we said, why? He said, that's exactly the state of our marriage at that point in time. It was so incredibly real to him what we had managed to capture on film. And that's the essence of the whole story.
So what was it that really changed her mind about abortion?
Well, the accuracy of everything we did in the movie, we've had medical organizations say this is exactly what happens, abortion doctors who have left the industry and so forth. So it's all credible. But the thing what happened was Abby went in to do the ultrasound. She was called in that day. They were a nurse short. She had never been in the surgical room, even though she runs the clinic. She was running the clinic, but she doesn't do the abortion. The doctor, they bring doctors in, and she puts the ultrasound wand on the baby, and then suddenly sees a baby and says, "Whoa, that's a baby. It's moving. It's not, it's not a clump of cells." And the doctor looks at her kind of and like, "They always move. Why do you think I do it this way?" And she's struck. She suddenly realized this is her Saul of Tarsus moment. She gets struck by lightning, and she's like, she wants to say something.
She made the connection that it was a human being in there, and she'd spent her whole professional life up till then denying that. She'd bought the party line that basically this is nothing more than a tumor, that this process is no more involved than a tooth extraction. And she believed it. She'd internalized it. She'd buried it. She'd reinforced that wall. And suddenly, and what she found so interesting, and this was clearly the hand of God, she said, when you do an ultrasound, normally you start off seeing an arm, you see a leg or whatever. She said, I had seen thousands of ultrasounds. I'd never seen a full, perfect profile from the first instant.
And some states have laws in place that require the mother to view an ultrasound of their unborn child before making a decision to abort. How effective are those laws?
Well, statistically, each state varies from state to state, and most of them don't have those laws enforced, or they don't have that law. But we have found that basically between 85 and 93% of the women that see an ultrasound do not abort. And so that's why an ultrasound is the most powerful thing for a person to do, is to basically see that it's not what the abortion industry is saying. And I mean, sadly, the abortion industry kills children for money. And that's what they get rid of children. And it's a sad thing. And by the way, when you see it, when you find out, when we were called to do this, it was a profound realization to us on a lot of levels. I mean, when you find out the truth, it's overwhelming.
Chuck, Carey, if we really are concerned as a society about the health of women, shouldn't women be fully informed of any potential health risks associated with abortion, both physically, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally?
Of course, but there's a lot of people and a lot of politics devoted to keeping that from happening. We had a professional psychologist tell us, a woman say that 100% of her adult female patients or clients who are on antidepressants are post-abortive, that there was a one-to-one correspondence.
100%. Think about that.
Now, here in the States, there's a tremendous amount of overuse of antidepressants. I assume that spills over into Canada as well. If that's the case, we're dealing with such a societal pool of depression, shame, grief that's buried, and these women are not allowed to talk about this. This movie is about healing for those women, where they're allowed to examine that. They're allowed to grieve. They're allowed to seek forgiveness, and then they're allowed to move on. And God willing, they'll become pro-life advocates for the women in their circle, in their church circles, and their families, with the women that they know.
And also, you got to remember, here in the States, and I'm sure in Canada, this is a multi-billion-dollar operation. We give billions of dollars. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of dollars that the federal government gives just to carry this on. There is money involved here. And so people, when that's the case, unfortunately, it's too much money. The temptation is too great. And so the bottom line is they're not going to tell women not to have abortions because it could hurt them. And by the way, the numbers of people that go into an abortion and come out either medically hurt, that people die from abortions. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy statistics. No one talks about that. They just tell everyone, oh, it's wonderful, you'll be fine, you can move on. And that's, I can't tell you how many women we've talked to, and they suffer from the very moment of the abortion, either medically, morally, spiritually, emotionally. It's a terrible thing that's going on. It's going on, by the way, all over the world. The number one cause of death in the world now, number one, more than war, AIDS, famine, is abortion. Just put that into your head for a second. People should think about that. We are eliminating the population of the world.
Chuck Conselman and Carrie Solomon, producers of Unplanned, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
The Alberta legislature came to an end for this summer, and it wrapped up last Friday after a marathon 40-hour filibuster from the NDP over Bill 8, the education bill. One of our regular contributors is Tyler Dawson, who's the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, who joins me now from Saskatoon, and he's been covering that story. So Tyler, what was the final verdict?
The final verdict was the bill passed. The final verdict was it was a very, very long filibuster. I had some friends who happened to be down in Stampede shortly after that, and they said that some of the members of the legislature were really, dragging themselves around after that. So this was, as viewers will remember, this was a really contentious bit of legislation. This is the one that dealt with gay-straight alliances, among other things. And so it was maybe the most heated bit of legislating that happened during the several weeks that the legislature sat in the spring here. So it all wrapped up, bill passed. The members are off to a well-deserved summer break, I suppose.
Now, the UCP say it passed, 13 pieces of legislation and fulfilled or nearly fulfilled about 55 platform promises in that 7-week legislative session. Tyler, it was a busy session that started with a carbon tax repeal.
Yeah, that's right. That was the big promise that the UCP had made on the election campaign. It was the very first thing they did. So by now, perhaps folks are noticing it at the gas pumps on their heating bills, perhaps. So that was a big one. There were many ththings that changed, not all of them enormous. Tourism, for example, came under the purview of the economic development minister. I don't think anyone would say this was an earth-shattering change, but it was a campaign promise, and the UCP fulfilled it. So, we've got a whole bunch of other stuff that came along. Some of the war room stuff was announced. Some of the public inquiry stuff was announced. You have decisions made on a legal challenge to the federal carbon tax. Jason Kenney's been, all over the country talking about Alberta and doors open for business, all that kind of stuff. So, it was a very busy session, and I can't help but think that Jason Kenney himself probably set the pace for this sort of thing. He's a frenetic fellow and is always really running around, and his staff are trying to keep up with him. And you kind of get the sense a little bit that maybe legislators were being swept along by him as well in this.
Yeah, I've never met a politician with so much energy. He's like the Energizer Bunny. And Alberta's open for business, and he's going to show everybody, the fact that we're open for business now. Now, a big part of what the UCP focused on was also red tape reduction, speaking of businesses, which they say will help small businesses thrive.
Yeah, that's right. And there's been this launch of a website sort of thing where, members of the public can submit issues they have with red tape, sort of, a public consultation without maybe the logistical difficulty of sitting in a room with a bunch of people. But the idea is that regular Albertans can say, look, this is a really irritating bit of red tape that we've got. Maybe you'll consider cutting it. And so that is part of what they are doing now through the summer here. And I would assume that once everyone is back in the fall for the next round, that we'll start to see some movement on those sorts of things.
Now, Jason Kenney met with the Western premiers a few weeks ago, and now again in Saskatoon, where you are. Kenney recently announced that Alberta will unilaterally drop half of its exceptions to the 2017 Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Tyler, what will that look like?
Yeah, so interprovincial free trade is sort of this, that would be, I would say, is the theme of this year's Council of the Federation meeting here in Saskatoon. All the premiers talking about reducing trade barriers between provinces, labor mobility between provinces, how can Canadians ship and sell products to each other and get contracts with each other without all these loopholes to jump through. So the announcement that Kenny made on Wednesday is that there's going to be the unilateral, so just Alberta is getting rid of basically procurement contracts that the Alberta government has. So this will mean that companies from all over Canada can bid on procurement contracts with the government of Alberta. The idea, of course, is that if you have more competitors in the pool, that will bring the pricing down on these things and bring the quality up. You'll get more bang for your buck, and it should, in the long term, save taxpayers money. There is sort of a sunset on this. It looks like they can reevaluate down the road. So it's sort of unclear what the long-term effect of this is going to be. And certainly it is just Alberta for the time being. Perhaps this will drag other premiers in the same direction, but for now it's just Wild Rose country that's doing this.
Now, the UCP government also announced that it was rewarding responsible ranchers with longer leases. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's right. So that was another Wednesday announcement that came out, and the idea is that there's going to be a set of guidelines that come out in coming months that as to what constitutes sort of environmentally exemplary care of land, water, and air. And farmers and ranchers that meet that threshold can get up to 20 years on their leases. So more details certainly to come on that in coming months, but no doubt around Lethbridge, that's going to be one that folks are watching quite closely.
Yeah, a lot of farmers and ranchers around here, definitely. Tyler, for the first time in many years, we're seeing a blue wave rolling across Canada. We have Conservative premiers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario. The list goes on. Now, the federal election is coming up October 21st. What might this actually look like for Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one that a lot of commentators are watching quite closely. As you mentioned, there's a whole bunch of Conservatives. Some of these are new governments, Alberta and Ontario, for example. Some of them are less new, Scott Moe in the Saskatchewan Party and Brian Pallister in Manitoba. He's actually got an election coming up in September. So, but there is this large block of Conservatives, and what that means for the federal Liberals, I think, is they have to sort of discern whether or not, the fact that New Brunswick has a Conservative premier, does that mean that they're going to vote for the federal Conservatives? And so you get the sense that they are working very, very hard to paint Andrew Scheer as, Stephen Harper 2.0, and which the Liberals would obviously see as a bad thing, and trying to sort of make the Conservatives federally out to be not the choice that folks want to make federally, even if they have perhaps already made that choice provincially. We're talking a big swath of the voting population here that's swung Conservative. So and in the last little while we've seen the Trudeau Liberals really stumble and sort of neck and neck with the Scheer Conservatives in the polls. So it's a long way out, and I could be eating my words in a few months. But when you look at these sort of trends, you can't help but wonder how the Liberals are going to pull this thing off if they're planning on winning this.
Let's talk about that connection, though, Tyler, about the provincial Conservatives with the federal counterpart. I mean, Andrew Scheer has been rumored to be distancing himself a little bit from Doug Ford in Ontario because of all the cuts that he's making right now. And Ford is apparently not very popular with a lot of Ontario voters. So is maybe that a good thing for Scheer?
Yeah, I think it probably is a good thing for Scheer. I mean, in Ontario, I think you could fairly say that you've got such huge urban populations there, but then all these massive rural ridings as well, that I can't imagine you're going to see a whole ton of votes go Conservative in, downtown Toronto. But you do have these sort of suburban areas where
the 905, yeah.
Exactly, where Conservatives have historically done quite well. So I think every Conservative who wins a victory right now tries to downplay any cuts they're going to make, any tough choices that are going to have to be made because you're competing against folks who aren't making those same promises, and nobody comes out of making those cuts super popular, necessary or not. So whether one agrees with what Doug Ford is doing or not, he's certainly chosen a hard path to walk here, and no doubt Scheer does not want to be walking that path with him right now when there are so many voters in Ontario.
But how about Kenny with Scheer? There's still that close relationship there. Have you seen that?
Yeah, it seems to be a close one. Kenny has backed Scheer sort of for a long time. He's promised to campaign for Scheer against Justin Trudeau. It incensed Maxime Bernier enough that he went out and said, Kenny picked the wrong guy. Scheer's not a conservative. He should, come and support me. And I can't imagine Jason Kenney is going to be doing that anytime soon. So that they are certainly, of that sort of pragmatic conservative bent, I think. And they're both political veterans in a way that, with all respect to Doug Ford isn't. He's reasonably new to this game on the provincial and federal scale. And that, I think, is also an explanation to some of his stumbles and one of the reasons why Kenny is unlikely to make the same ones.
It's interesting that you bring up People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier saying that Andrew Scheer is a fake conservative and Jason Kenney shouldn't align himself with Andrew Scheer. But I'm thinking to myself, is that just sour grapes from Maxime Bernier because he didn't win the leadership?
It certainly would be a fair criticism, I think. Maxime Bernier, he's tracking to the right of the Conservative Party, sensing an appetite for it. I think he's right to some extent that there is an appetite for this, but I think he's mistaken thinking it's the appetite that he thinks it is, in the sense that sort of the really vitriolic anti-immigration stuff, really poor vetting of candidates, all sort of controversial things have come up in the last little while. So, Jason Kenney is certainly not going to abandon a guy who's campaigning on many of the similar things that Stephen Harper did, that the Conservative Party of Canada has a long record on. And Maxime Bernier is sort of taking the snitch line sort of paranoia and running with it. And he's on to something, but it's certainly not what he thinks it is, I think.
And if you look at the numbers nationally, where's the PPC running? Maybe 3-4% of the popular vote? I mean, it's quite small now, isn't it? Yeah.
If that, for sure. They have not had impressive showings in any of the by-elections they ran candidates in.
Now, Tyler, the inquiry into foreign funding landlocking Alberta Oil has kicked off, and we won't know the results for about a year? What may the results of the findings be?
Right. So this is going to be looking at any source of money coming into Canadian environmental organizations from basically the United States. So this is the tar sands campaign would be sort of the specific campaign that came up. Tom Steyer, who's recently announced that he's going to try running for president, was another name that came up, sort of a billionaire U.S. philanthropist. So it's going to be looking into the finances of all these organizations, where it came from. It's a $2.5 million inquiry. And one of the interesting things about this is we actually know a lot of it already from sort of previous charitable filings and research done by Vivian Krause mainly. So I think the question that a lot of reporters had was, what new are we going to see out of this? And it will report back next July 2nd, I believe, is the official date. But what it's going to do, if there's any benefit of it, even if we don't get a whole bunch more information, is it's going to bring everything together in, a neat little package. And Steve Allen, who is an accountant who is heading this thing up, does have power under the Inquiry Act to compel testimony, compel documents, things like that. The catch, of course, is that ends at Alberta's borders. So he should be able to get things from organizations based here, people based here. His power really is a little bit more limited. He can't, walk into the United States and say, hello, produce a bunch of documents that show you cut checks. So it's great PR, no doubt. It's going to be very useful in terms of collecting all of this in one place. I think it certainly remains to be seen just how extensive this thing can be at the end of the day.
Well, what recourse would Alberta have, the government of Alberta? Will there actually be court challenges, maybe against the Rockefellers? I mean, what can the government of Alberta actually do with this?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's not totally clear yet, I don't think. There does seem to be some sense that there could be provincial regulations in some regard on financing political activities with foreign money. A lot of this power rests with the federal government, though, in terms of charitable and nonprofit organizations and how they are involved in political activities. So the ball's really in their court. Now, Jason Kenney did sort of speculate that maybe there will be lawsuits. Maybe you could have a tort against a U.S. company or organization saying, oh, you've harmed our business interests, you've slandered our reputation. Perhaps that is a thing. Certainly, I think part of this inquiry is going to come back with some answers to those questions. And so there will be, hopefully, a little more official, concrete sense of what can happen next.
Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining me from Saskatoon. Thanks again, Tyler, and we'll talk to you again in the fall.
Thanks so much.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.